Perspectivas Latinas, a community service of CAN TV. I'm your host, Juan Carlos Hernandez. Contratiempo has been helping to define Spanish language literature in Chicago, and they are a creative force during the city's month-long celebration of poetry. Here to talk about their work, we have Juana Goergen. Thank you, and welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. We just got into the show so quickly today, and but thanks for being here and for coming to share about Contratiempo. Let's start off by talking about the organization and its history, because it was primarily a magazine. Tell us about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Contratiempo has always been more than the magazine, but it started to be known in Chicago through this publication. Okay. However, Contratiempo has always run workshops, poetry workshops, writing workshops, and had always helped organizing and co-organizing events in the city. As time has gone by, Contratiempo has become a cultural center, more than just the publication or just the poetry workshops or just organizing small events or helping organize small events. Contratiempo organizes its own events, and it's also opening the doors of their headquarters to other events that they help Chicago cultural creators to organize. For example, during the MLA conference, the MLA is the Modern Language Association conference
I dislike
in Chicago.
MLA style for research. It's I think a headache for so many of us that were students at one point.
Yes. Yes, but they had their conference this year in Chicago.
Okay.
And there were many poets, many writers from other countries and from all over the U.S. here in Chicago. And Contratiempo allowed the MLA and the people who wanted to organize through the MLA the presentation of a novel by Claudio Palomares Salas, a young Mexican writer who lives in Canada. His father is well known in Mexico by people of my generation because his name is Gabino Palomares, and he is a singer, very well respected musician. The son is a musician too and a great writer. And he has written his first novel, and it was in the headquarters of Contratiempo that he presented his novel here in Chicago while the MLA was happening.
Well, and you, that's certainly one of the events that you helped organize, but you mentioned workshops.
Yes.
Tell me about workshops and how they happen and how often they happen at Contratiempo.
Every other Sunday for many, many, many years. There's a poetry workshop that one of the associates of Contratiempo directs, and that's Febronio Satarain. And in these workshops, they are open to the public.
The public?
Yes, so many poets that are affiliated with Contratiempo are sitting around the table, but there's also many poets from the community that it is always announced on the revista, on the journal, and so many other poets from the city would come to these workshops. And they are organized like the old workshops in Mexico, for example, of poesía, of creative writing in Mexico, where you bring your piece and a copy of your text, you give everyone one copy, and then everyone reads the copy and comments, make commentaries on what they think you should fine-tune. I had myself a very productive experience in the workshop.
Okay, really?
Yeah.
Well, tell me about that experience.
I wrote a poem that I thought in my head, this is complete, perfect. I don't have to do anything else to this.
I don't need to touch it, it's
Yes,
done.
it's done. I bring it to the taller, and the leader of the taller said to me, but do you realize that the center, the core of this poem is that the angels do not have sexual organs? And I thought, what? What is this about? But then I realized, yes, it was about angels, and I realized there could be many ways to write a poem at that moment. That you could write the poem that I had written, or I could give a different view to that same poem and write a different version of the poem. So I took the poem home and wrote a different version that to me were like two completed versions, but an angle that I had not thought of when I was writing the poem. So the workshops or this poetry workshop is very useful for writers.
Okay, I'm curious. You said it's, and I want to get back to your poetry and your poem, this one about angels, but also how you got into, not got into, but how poetry became such a big part of your life. Well, I definitely want to get into that. But you said these workshops are open, excuse me, to the public.
Yes.
How does the public come in? I mean, I know many of us, I think, I'm including myself, would be rather shy about wanting to share something as personal as a piece of writing and then a poem, and to have people you may not know read it.
You have to be a little bit brave, I guess.
So it does
to
require
work
courage.
in workshops. However, I think this is when you see it from the outside.
Okay.
I think that once you get in a room full of writers or poets, and you know you're one of them, you have your little paper with your poem written there, and you see how the others are sharing. And it's not only, I mean, we also have, for the most part, we have the workshop, and the leadership is Febronio Satarain, but sometimes we have also guest leaders, writers that have come here from Latin America, the writers that have come to the Poetry Festival. For example, we had one workshop that it was, the leader was Ernesto Cardenal, the great Nicaraguan poet. So you have the opportunity to have somebody that knows poetry, that is known for poetry, reading your words and giving you advice. If you're open to let poetry grow in yourself and in the page, you are very happy. There's no fear.
But I always think, and I've discussed with some writer friends, because I do writing myself, and we've discussed poetry and the difficulty, I think, in judging it. At least I haven't really. I've read poetry recently, but to actually sit down and say I'm going to judge this, it's so different from an essay, for example.
Yes.
Or from an article or a novel or creative nonfiction. How have you gone about critiquing and advising people from the community, writers who want to improve their work or find that essence of the poem?
Well, in these workshops, this is not a critical, the kind of academic criticism of poetry. This is more helping a writer find his or her own voice. So this is a question of, for example, in the ones I have participated, as an academic, as a teacher, I look very closely to the grammar in a poem, for example. So for me, when I'm reading a poem of someone, it's your voice. I have to respect that voice, and I do. And writers respect, for the most part, each other's voices. But I would be looking, from my part, to see if a person is missing accent marks or if there are certain grammar situations there that this person can easily go and correct at home and present the poem in well-standing Spanish in the page, right? Other writers are focusing more on perspective, like in the case of my poem, when this other writer tells me, have you thought that you don't only have to see this idea on this particular moment, but that it has multiple ways of being written, the same idea. I have not thought about that. So that gave me the space for another poem. Or other writers would say, I don't understand what you want to say. What is this really about? And then the writer explains, and it's clear to him or her, and it's clear to the rest of the group.
So it's, I guess as far as the writing process, I think a lot of times it's brushing away the words that we try to impose, I think, on the work.
Yes.
Or things we try to say through the work, when actually what wants to be said is trying to come out.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And sometimes we don't allow it. And a lot of times I think writing is listening.
Yes.
Right?
Yes, you're the writer. You got it.
It's sitting still.
Yes.
At least that's what I have found.
Yes.
Sitting still and listening
Yeah.
and allowing that to come through. Because we want someone to do so many things, and it doesn't necessarily work that way.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about your experience as a writer and a poet. What brought that about? Are writers born, or are they made? And what's been your experience?
And I guess I was born with a sensibility. I think you are born with a certain sensibility to listening, to words, and so on. But I think I was made. My mother was a seamstress. We were poor people, and she would sit and she was sewing or knitting at home, mostly with her sewing machine, and I was always sitting on the floor by her. She would give me scraps of fabric or things to do stuff with my hands. But while she was sewing, she would be reciting poems for me. And I would be like fascinated listening to her. And then as I was growing up, she said to me, you have to listen and memorize so that you can do the same to your children. And I was a 10-year-old girl. I said, I guess you absorb this kind of, especially when it's a mother's voice or a father's voice. I think that has a certain magic for a child. So I was sitting there and listening and learning the poems, and pretty soon...
What are some of those early poems?
They were from these, the 100 best poems in Latin America, that old book. And they were some love poems and some poems that were advising for life. For example, there was a poem, the longest poem I guess I memorized with her, was a poem about an actor, an English actor that was a clown, a comedy actor, and everybody laughed about him. And then one day, this man, so sad and depressed, comes to visit a psychologist, a psychiatrist basically, and said to him, I am so depressed, I am so sad. And the doctor said to him, go, see Garrick, see this actor, he will cure you. And he said, I am that actor. Change the prescription because that's me.
Oh, wow.
And the didactic within that poem is that sometimes we learn to cry smiling, and sometimes we smile crying. And so they were very good for my life, you know? And I continue my love of poetry to this day.
And how did that lead to coming to, well, how did you come to Chicago? Because you're not originally from here. And how did that eventually lead to working with Contratiempo?
Well, I studied, I came to the US to do graduate studies, and when you're a graduate student and you're looking for a job, you go wherever they give you the job. And in my case, I had two possibilities. That was the good days. Those were the good days. And I had the possibility of going to George Mason University near Washington, D.C., or there was DePaul. My issue was that I had come to the interview here, and I saw the amazing Latino community in Chicago. And I had friends who were in places where they were teaching Spanish and literature, and they had no community to sort of, you bounce back words and ideas with your community, right? Especially if you're teaching literature or Latin American culture. And so I begged DePaul University to hire me. And I got the job, and I came to Chicago. And Contratiempo, was an interesting match. I met Contratiempo through work that I have done before with people associated with the journal in other poetry publications. And so I met these people, and then these people introduced me to other people, and eventually I realized, okay, this is a lot of people together. This is not just this friend or that friend, these are many friends, and they embraced me and I embraced them fully.
Wow, wow. So I know that Contratiempo is a very big participant in the celebration of poetry during April, which is National Poetry Month, right?
Yes, yes.
What I want to do now is I want us to look at a couple of poets that participated in the festival last year, and we can listen to them, and then we'll continue with our conversation.
Great, great.
Si esa gota se sublevara, dándole significado a este torrente reprimido por rabia, por ingenuidad, por desconocimiento, sembraríamos de espadas las manos tan tranquilas, se plantearía una situación de respeto. Así el enemigo tendría que advertir nuestra presencia, comprenderían que no estamos así de muertos suya, la ofensa suyo, el desorden suya, la desobediencia, si se avecinara el juego de las decapitaciones, si despertáramos a la oportunidad de otro desacato, mejor dicho, al abuso de la estafa comicio tras comicio, se me advierte que tenga más cuidado al hablarles, porque mis palabras podrían ir pretenciosamente encumbradas, pero prefiero el riesgo de la creencia a rebajar el orden del fraseo. Aquí no se busca apelar a la conciencia, pero soy consciente, y de regreso al cauce, a la supuesta complicación de estos verbos, que si son enreverados, que si no son para el pueblo, bien habría que redefinir el concepto, ya que pueblo es un error fatuo que no se deja sugerir. Esta manera de decirte nace desde una precariedad madura de hambres y sustancias de antes. Si esa gota se sublevara, loca en los pentagramas, en la tinta del cementerio, trazando el camino ansiado, y tu sonrisa cada mañana y alfombras de clavo y canela. Si sobráramos de pausa tu maltrato, si no tiemblo y no cierro los ojos cuando me das la mano, si tu mordida de paz, si te abrazo hermana, si te beso hermano, si esa gota me sublevara, si esa sangre me sublevara, si tu cuerpo me sublevara.
Bufandas. Una anciana dormida en el tren, envuelta en áurea bufanda como yema de huevo. Una anciana como plato de natillas, salvo pelo de tan rubio, invisibles cejas de tan albas. Una anciana como postre genuino, como escupitajo de un sol meridiano, somnolienta y atónita que no cambia de color al salir del túnel. una vieja leona que se estea en su roca, y al otro lado del pasillo, una joven envuelta en bufanda naranja como una rebanada de mamey, una joven que lee papeles a mordidas arropada en un espeso abrigo, su cuello mamey cercenado, sus mejillas rosadas y sus lentes marrones, y el mamey deslizándose por la hoja blanca como un sensual comentario, como una mordida en la nuca de león que la monta y la cubre entre los jirones naranja del ocaso, y más lejos, una seria mujer de bufanda magenta, una seria mujer cual licuado de bayas que lee muy seria un libro y reprueba con magenta mirada y se traga su hambre y se come su saya magenta entre negros abrigos y grises paraguas, pero atisba de reojo la procesión de audaces bufandas y a cada lado imparables serpientes, reptantes de luces rojas, de luces de oro y plata, más veloces que este gris tren de incontables bufandas. Y yo, gris y negro, y yo mordido a trozos, escupido semilla a semilla, regurgitado sobre mi negra libreta, y yo bocado de leonas de sabana, y yo tan cercano a casa y tan lejos de la blanca ventisca, y yo en general, pardo y ocioso, perdido tras mi negra mirada.
Okay, so, well, thanks to Contratiempo for sharing that, and I know that there's going to be a lot more exciting work you'll be doing, and you do year-round, but especially in April. Tell me about workshops and other events you have, you participate in and you organize.
Yes, the first event that we are having related to the festival in April is coming up March 6th, and this is going to be, March 6th to 7, 8, 9, to the 10th. We are going to have a video artist from Mexico visiting here in Chicago. His name is Johari, and he will be conducting 2 workshops, one at DePaul University, and in that one he will be doing showing students how to do video poems. We have a video poetry contest for the festival, and we want to have more people educated in the art of making video poetry. There would also be another workshop the following Saturday at the headquarters of Contratiempo in South Carpenter, of the same artist and same idea, a workshop of video poetry for the community.
Okay, and so what is this, people stand in front of a camera, or how does it work? Or people make a mix of things, or is it video poetry pretty open? Tell me about that.
Video poetry is an art form of poetry that is taking root in Latin America and Spain in the last years. There's a very important contest, video poetry contest in Brazil called Fliporto, and the prize for the winner of Fliporto is 32,000 euros.
Oh, wow.
That big it is as an art form.
Wow, that's huge.
And what it is mainly poets who want to do a visual representation of their poems, decide on images. It's sort of like thinking your poem or writing your poem twice. Once with your words and once with images that would correspond or that you think that would go with those words. It has nothing to do with what you would find in YouTube of if somebody says crying, then you see somebody crying in the picture or something like that. It requires a level of creativity in terms of thinking metaphorically, your own metaphors.
Okay, so it's a visual metaphor.
Yes.
Okay, it's an extension of the poem.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And what are there's also another poetry contest that Contratiempo's having, as far as I think it's about a place or a city.
Yes, there's a national poetry contest, and the due date is coming soon, so we encourage everyone to participate. And this one, the theme is the city, is inspired by Carl Sandburg's centenary of and his poem To Chicago as a city. And
We are certainly a different city from 100 years ago, or
yes,
whenever he wrote the poem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And a different experience of the city for everyone. And this would be $500 for the first prize and the publication in Contratiempo of the winner poem. And there's another contest for the community. And this one, as you said before, poetry is to sit and listen. And this one is about declamation of poetry. And this one is for the community, for the Chicago University, student community, and Latino communities in Chicago, of anybody who like to recite poetry. And it's $100 the prize, the winner prize, and publication of the poem in
Now,
Diálogo.
I'm curious, do the poems have to be in Spanish?
Yes, that's what the one caveat with the festival is that April is Poetry Month and celebrates poetry in the US, right, in English. So we wanted to open a little niche for Spanish and created April as a poetry month for Spanish poetry too.
Okay.
So the activities are in Spanish.
They're all in Spanish. What about Spanglish? I'm curious, especially given the fact that we are in Chicago and the Latino community is dynamic and young, and there is this code switching and code blending of languages, primarily Spanish and English, but I'm sure even Polish gets thrown in there some places, and other languages as well.
Well, we have had poetry readings, for example, where poets have read poems in English of their own poetry because they are Latino poets, precisely like Luz Maumpierre, and they write in both Spanish and English. So they decide in their readings. It's not that we say no English or Spanish only.
Right.
And the event that we have at the Poetry Foundation, the poets are reading in Spanish, but their translation of their poems are in a screen so everyone can enjoy. So we do have bilingual events. And poetry, there's something for poets and writers. There's the poetry license. And a poet can write. I have poems where I have phrases in English or other languages.
That's great. And it's a good note to end on. We could talk for hours about poetry and your work and the work of Contratiempo. Thank you so much for coming out to share what you did today.
Thank you, and I hope you all come to Poesía en Abril.
Thank you so much. Perspectivas Latinas is a community service of CAN TV. If your nonprofit would like to work with CAN TV, call 312-738-1400 and ask for nonprofit services. Tune into Perspectivas Latinas for local issues and concerns every Thursday at 8:30 p.m. on CAN TV 21. I'm Juan Carlos Hernandez. Thank you for joining us.